two big issues stand out. The oldest communities here predate not only a meteor impact around 9,600, but also predate the Hiawatha impact. So these communities were living before the first of those two major, highly probable, correctly dated impacts. Secondly, such urban communities depended upon extensive cultivation. So these findings are pushing back the start of civilized culture by at least 5,000 years. One might have expected it to take centuries for the early Egyptian culture to perfect how they made the mummification remedies. Now, what this BBC evidence is suggesting is that actually they had done all that experimentation, trial and error, and they perfected it at least by 3,600 BC, 500 years before the first pharaoh. That takes a little explanation. Hello everyone, this is the 8th episode in our series, and today the topic is, does conventional history overlook earlier civilized cultures?
In your book, you claim that conventional history misses the first civilizations. Can you explain?
Yes, in the last couple of episodes, we've explored evidence that Earth suffered a series of catastrophic meteor impacts, maybe as many as 10, which were climatically significant on a global basis. And this occurred in less than 7,000 years. Today, probably the biggest discussion point in ancient history is whether there was one or more advanced cultures existing prior to what conventional history tells us. By advanced culture, I think we can all agree that we're not talking about a culture anywhere near as advanced as we are today, but a culture at least as advanced as the Roman Empire was, clearly with some skills more advanced than the dynastic Egyptians achieved. The dynastic Egyptian period is from 3,200 BC up to Cleopatra, 50 BC. Indeed, the production of many artifacts attributed particularly to the dynastic Egyptian period defy explanation, given the tools believed to have been available at that time. This is a big issue we shall explore. So what does conventional history tell us first? As taught in schools, it defines the first civilization as the Sumerians, modern Iraq, and Egypt. Sumer supposedly started with its first king, Etana, crowned in 3760 BC. And incidentally, this event triggered the Jewish counting of years, which is still spot on with the Jewish calendar. Absolutely incredible. In the Jewish calendar, this year is 5785, which is simply 362025. Bang on. I think that's absolutely amazing. The year count was obviously maintained by the Sumerians. Abraham came from Sumer. He carried the knowledge and the counting with him. But it's still incredible how it endured through the trials of the sojourn in Egypt, the exile to Babylon, the two periods of Roman genocide, AD 66 to 70 and AD 136 to AD 140. Quite extraordinary. Although personally I would also give some credit to the Sabians of Haran, who I think helped out from time to time. Meanwhile in Egypt, the first pharaoh of the first dynasty, Menesh, I think it dates from around 3150 BC. Evidence that civilization started much earlier is piling up. So let's just define civilization. In short, I think we would consider it as the difference between hunter-gathering existence, as the move to farming and the domestication of animals. Once man starts farming, it starts to create a food surplus. The food surplus enables other able-bodied to do other things. Critically, this will also lead to further increases in food production. Better tilling and so forth, better tools, more use of fertilizer, better storage, better irrigation. All of these things create a virtuous feedback loop that sustain even greater food surpluses and therefore enable more and more as a proportion of the population to focus on non-food activities. And today, most advanced cultures, you've got 1 or 2% of the population engaged in agriculture. Everybody else is doing other things. That's how you get civilization. So when did farming start? And when did the first cities develop? I can recall our belief only a few decades ago that the first crops and the first domesticated animals were dated to around 6000 BC. But the evidence of the first large settlements have repeatedly pushed this date back because a city defines the need for farming.
I think we need another map, right?
Spot on. The oldest excavations in Jericho have now been dated to 9000 BC, with a large stone wall and a large tower dated to around 8000 BC. Jericho, as you can see here, just above the Dead Sea. Haran, which is the northern capital of Sumer, has references in cuneiform records that date back to 2500 BC, which is not very old. But there are evidence of nearby settlements that date back to at least 10,000 BC. And we can see Haran right up here, now in Turkey. Damascus has archaeological remains dating between 8,000 and 10,000 BC. You can see it here. The King's Highway, the red line here, is an incredibly ancient road that links Egypt through Jericho, through Damascus, Palmyra, up close towards Haran. So it links all these really ancient cities, going back between 8,000 and 10,000 BC. Even older urban developments are now being uncovered in Turkey. I think many of you will know about Göbekli Tepe, these amazing deliberately filled in pits that have been found to contain incredible stone carved obelisks. But that's not alone. Many other, in fact 16 sites have now been identified. Almost all are hilltop sites, defensive, possibly fortified. One thing to note about Göbekli Tepe, as we can see up here, it's only 50 kilometers from the other ancient city, Haran. 16 different locations have now been identified mainly in eastern Turkey. These sites are now being excavated. Some cover a very large area, and ground radar contains hundreds of buildings. Only a very small part has been excavated so far. Even of the first Göbekli Tepe, only 10% has been excavated. On Kula Tala, of which we've excavated about 5%, we've already found evidence dating back to 11,000 BC. At another, Karan Tepe, only 1% has been excavated, but the built area covers 60,000 square meters. Two big issues stand out. The oldest communities here predate not only a meteor impact around 9,600, but also predate the Hiawatha impact. So these communities were living before the first of those two major, highly probable, correctly dated impacts. Secondly, such urban communities depended upon extensive cultivation. So these findings are pushing back the start of civilized culture by at least 5,000 years, 5,000 to about 11,000 BC, and nearly doubling the age during which mankind has established thriving cultures from the past 5,000 years to nearly 13,000 years.
You talked about Jericho and Damascus, which were cities before 8000 BC. served by a highway between Egypt and Sumer. What was happening in Egypt?
As we noted in an earlier episode, there appear to be numerous artifacts, supposedly from the dynastic period of Egypt, say 3000 BC up to 50 BC, with craftsmanship that defies explanation. There are numerous videos with authoritative engineers and stonemasons which identify the crazy explanations underpinning the conventional view of history, of how and who made these things. These are aspects which I will cover where I think I can add to the debate. But let's start with something that's not got much coverage, but is easily understood by those of us who are not professional machine tool operators or stonemasons. Today I'll focus on mummification. A BBC documentary a few years ago reported an analysis of the embalming recipes applied to two mummies. One dated a few centuries before the first pharaoh, dated to around 3600 BC, and the other dated much more recently, around 600 BC. So that's 3600 and 600 BC. Note, the period between these two different mummies was 3000 years, and the youngest is less than 3000 years from now. That's incredible. Two findings jump out. Firstly, the recipes used in the mummification process contain almost 100 compounds. Secondly, the recipes used near identical ingredients in near identical proportions. One might have expected it to take centuries for the early Egyptian culture to perfect how they made the mummification remedies, and they would learn from experience. We know they reached a stage where mummification leaves near perfect skin and facial features after many thousand years. But surely when they started, they weren't very good at it, and they learned from experience. But that learning process must have taken hundreds or thousands of years to perfect. Now, what this BBC evidence is suggesting is that actually they had done all that experimentation, trial and error, and they perfected it at least by 3600 BC, 500 years before the first pharaoh. That takes a little explanation. In 2018, the Journal of Archaeological Science published an article reporting on findings from an embalming studio that had been unearthed at Saqqara. This had a large stock of labelled ingredients and even instructions for mixing and applying embalming remedies. The report noted, and I'll read here, the effectiveness of the embalming technology in preserving skin and preventing decomposition reveals a surprisingly deep knowledge of microbial biology. Philip Stockhammer of the Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich published an analysis of the source of the ingredients in Nature magazine. First major point is that most of the substances were not native to Egypt. They were all imported. Now we're going back a long way in looking at this. Many came from Eastern Mediterranean regions such as cedar oil, juniper, cypress oil and tar, bitumen and olive oil. But surprisingly, some substances were sourced from much further away. Gum from the damar tree from the forest of the Western Ghat in India. Some from Malaysia and Indonesia. The resin of the elemi tree that's native to the Philippines. Maxime Radiot of the University of Tübingen noted that the specific recipes were used to embalm different parts of the body, with elemi resin, pistachio resin, byproducts of juniper and beeswax, specifically used for embalming the head. Other recipes were specified for skin softening and body cleaning. Ancient Egyptians knew how to select and mix antimicrobial substances which enabled perfect skin preservation. Embalming was carried out in a well-organised institutional way, supported by an effective international trading organisation to source the multitude of materials utilised. Whilst the Harappan Indus Valley culture, in what is now Pakistan and northwestern India, has been connected to the Sumerians, the rise of this culture is only dated from about 3,300. So that perfectly preserved mummy from 3,600 was 3 centuries before the Sumerians might have founded Harappa. It seems the Egyptians were trading with peoples in the Philippines long before that. Nowadays, the research operations of Big Pharma routinely test the properties of natural flora from exotic corners of the world. But pre-dynastic Egyptians supposedly lacked physical access, analytical tools, and computerized testing. Neither could they contact DeepMind to forecast the protein shapes needed to establish critical functions of their formulae. Supposedly, primitive Stone Age hunter-gatherers are unlikely to have been able to sample and test myriad combinations of leaves, roots, flowers, bark, resin, etc. from thousands of species from half across the world. The origins of Egyptian embalming recipes must lie in an earlier culture, equipped with some scientific resources and a far-flung trading empire. As I describe above, we could develop mummification techniques today that would rival the ancient Egyptian recipes. But how could they do it? Next time, we'll look at some of the engineering and stoneworking enigmas, plus some other less explored aspects such as planning and project management. It's not boring, it's thought-provoking. Taken together, the Egyptian civilization must in many ways have been as advanced as ours at the start of the Industrial Revolution 250 years ago. Thank you.